Please consider becoming a patron of MythVision Podcast. You'll get early access to every video, including this amazing one, and you can ask me personal questions, private message me, anything you'd like. Professor John J. Collins, thanks again for joining me. I can't tell you how this is too much fun. I gotta keep myself contained here. My good friend Ben Lambert, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, says, "Hey, got some questions for your fantastic guest. John J. Collins, is the rider on the clouds in Daniel intended to connect to the Davidic Messiah, or was that just a later correlation? Does Daniel even really care about the Davidic Messiah?"
I don't think Daniel cares about the Davidic Messiah. Now, again, this has been an enormously controversial issue. In the book of Daniel, you have a vision, 4 great beasts coming up out of the sea, and then this figure coming on the clouds of heaven. And I think some of the background of that was finally clarified in the last century when some of the ancient Near Eastern myths were found. And the pattern that you get in this myth is similar to what you get in the old Canaanite myths, where Yam is the chaotic sea, and Baal is the rider of the clouds, and then El is the supreme god above that. Now, you see, the great puzzle of the book of Daniel is everywhere else in the Hebrew Bible, the figure riding on the clouds is Yahweh, the God of Israel. This is the one exception. Now, there's a Jewish scholar at Hebrew University named Michael Siegel who's writing a commentary on Daniel. He gave a paper at SBL a few years ago in which he was saying, well, in Daniel it is also Yahweh. Now, he would go on and complicate that, but he asked another Jewish scholar, now, I shouldn't say Yahweh, should I say Hashem, the name? And the other guy said to him, you're saying there's another God above him? And you're worried about what you're calling him? That's not your problem.
Wow, yeah.
But he wasn't really saying that the author of Daniel believed there was another God above him. But that's the problem of the text. Now, the solution that many of us think is quite convincing is that this reflects the old Canaanite idea where El is the supreme god and Baal is the rider of the clouds. But here, in many parts of the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh takes over the role of Baal. This cannot be the case here. And so, when you read the rest of the book of Daniel, you find the Prince of Israel is the Archangel Michael. And so this is who I think is intended by the figure riding on the clouds. Now, within 100 years, certainly, maybe less, there was a revival of interest in the Davidic Messiah. There seems to have been very little interest in the Davidic Messiah for a couple of 100 years. Probably after the Babylonian exile, there was a flurry of expectation, hoping that it would be restored. Then you get a number of passages in prophetic texts where it's very difficult to say when these things were written. But it shows there was some ongoing interest in it. And then those fade out. Then, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Messiah makes a comeback. Now, 2 things happened. I think this was after the book of Daniel was written. The book of Daniel was written around the time of the Maccabees. Actually, seems to have been written before December of 164. It's one of the cases where we can date a book with some precision. But, first of all, the Maccabees eventually made themselves kings. There's a text called the Psalms of Solomon that talks about the Hasmoneans, the descendants of the Maccabees, as those to whom you did not give a promise. So illegitimate kings. And the Psalms of Solomon say to God, raise up for us a descendant of David, a legitimate king. That's one reason why you get a resurgence of interest. The other one is when the Romans came, they needed to fight for independence again. But by then, they were used to having a Jewish king, and they think again in terms of a Jewish king. But at the time when Daniel was written, they hadn't had a Jewish king for 400 years. And, they'd gotten used to it. And what they were looking for wasn't a king, but an angelic leader who would come and take care of things.
It is fascinating that this does something different while using these other myths.
Yeah.
I recently interviewed Dr. Elaine Pagels, right? We were talking about we were discussing the sea in the book of Revelation and how there's no more sea. I said, what is this? And she's, well, if you go back, there's a story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that Yahweh's fighting Leviathan idea, but also that Israelites weren't really seafaring people either. So there was usually this tendency to potentially put the ethnicity there of some seafaring people, potentially. But definitely a dragon concept here, and that there's no more sea. We find that in Daniel as well, don't we?
Not exactly. It doesn't say there will be no more sea, but, the beasts in Daniel 7 come up out of the sea. Now, these beasts eventually get destroyed, and the fourth one is thrown into the fire. It doesn't talk about eliminating the sea. That's actually a very interesting thing, because in most of the Hebrew Bible, the sea never gets eliminated. The Lotan, Leviathan, doesn't get, and he doesn't get killed definitively. The trouble with monsters like this is they keep coming back. And that's the way they work, because they become metaphors for any crisis that you encounter, whether it be of nature or politics or whatever. There's a good book by John Levinson, just retired from Harvard, I believe, Creation and the Persistence of Evil. Now, the idea there is that in the mythic imagination of the ancient Near East, you see, that you don't have creation out of nothing. Creation is a matter of subduing chaos. Now, and what we sometimes call evil is just chaos, forces of disorder. There's a lot to be said for this.
Yeah.
I think they may have been onto something on this more than the idea of creation out of nothing. Because in much of the Hebrew Bible, God has to fight to stay in control. And if he didn't have to fight, it wouldn't be so impressive. You don't get credit for beating a weak team. So you have to have a worthy opponent. And that's what you had.
It is interesting you make that comment about the no more sea, because it sounds to me in Revelation, we're jumping around and I don't want to go too far because Daniel was the question, but specifically the idea that no more sea, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like John, the author on Patmos, not the apostle, is kind of hoping in this vision, I like to say hoping, but nonetheless sees that there's no more sea, is saying God will finally, for sure, actually put an end to all evil. He's going to be done with chaos. He's going to, look at the New Jerusalem, right? So now you don't have any more chaos. It's completely killed. The dragon was going to be released for a short period of time, but then it seems like going to be bound forever, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe that's what he has in mind, is it will be completely finished.
Yes, I think in the apocalyptic writing, you do have the expectation that things will be completely finished. But again, you get that more clearly in Revelation than you do in Daniel.
Right.
Daniel, in many ways, is still a transitional work.
Thank you, Dr. Collins.